Hey, Chef Ro here. Today I'm going to teach you how to make a savory souffle. They are not that much different than making a sweet souffle, so if you already know how to make a sweet souffle, you're pretty well set. But we do have to swap out some ingredients because we aren't going to have the sugar to stabilize the egg whites, and we're also not going to have it to help with our ramekins. So let me show you what we're going to do. First things first, you need to have your bechamel made, which I've already done because we've made bechamel in almost every dish. Go figure, the French, they love their bechamel. But you'll notice that this bechamel is much thicker. You'll find that there's a lot more butter, a lot more flour, and a lot less milk. Okay, it's going to be really, really thick. While the bechamel is hot, you're going to stir in your cheese. You usually want to do it on the very fine grater of the cheese so that it'll melt really fast. So you want to try and get it finely shredded, but if it's regular shredded, that's okay too. Okay? You can use any cheese you want as long as you stick in that kind of 1 cup realm. Okay? If you would like to add something else, like I felt like having mushrooms in my souffle today, you need to get them into minuscule pieces. Okay? I put my mushrooms in the food processor and then I sauteed them to get the water out. Okay? If it's something that needs to be cooked, like a bell pepper or something like that, an onion, you need to cook it before it goes into the base of the souffle because there will not be any place for you to cook it in the oven. The bechamel and the egg whites are going to protect it from cooking itself. So if you wanted to use like frozen corn, delicious. Already roasted bell peppers, great. Just make sure that the pieces are really, really tiny or else it's going to prevent them from rising. Okay, let me show you what mine looks like right now. So you can see my mushrooms are really, really, really small, and I've already got my cheese in here, and it's all nice and melted, okay? And you can see how very, very thick it is. This is still just a little bit warm, so while it's still a little warm, I don't want to add the egg yolks just yet, or else the egg yolks might start to cook before we're ready for them to. So I'm going to get my ramekins ready while we're waiting for this to cool just a touch. With the ramekins, we need to butter, and if it was a sweet one, we'd sugar them. In savory ones, we usually use Parmesan cheese, or you can also use breadcrumbs if you prefer. Easiest way to do it is just to get your finger in there, get a little bit of butter, right, and rub it around. But you need to make sure that every last little bit is covered with butter, or else if you've got one spot that doesn't have butter, the egg whites aren't going to have a spot to climb. It's not going to have anything to grab onto. The egg whites need those little Parmesan pieces or breadcrumbs to grab on and climb up the ramekin. So if you have a spot that's missing, then what's going to happen is that your souffle is going to come out like this. It's going to come out lopsided because one side's going to stop climbing wherever that spot was that was empty. You do want to butter all the way to the top of this rim. Now, if you want the souffles that come up like this high, you see in the magazines and stuff, then what you need to do is you need to take a piece of parchment paper or foil, and we're going to have to butter and Parmesan it too, and then you tie it around right here with some string, and that allows you to get a higher souffle rise because you can start with much more to begin with. These ramekins are slightly larger than the recipe calls for. I'm only going to make 4, and then the last of it I'm just going to throw into one big ramekin for my purposes today. So these have all been buttered completely, and if you notice, it's just a very thin layer of butter, right? You don't want big chunks of butter in here. We're not trying to fry these things. We just need to get them to not stick, okay? Now I have some nicely finely grated Parmesan cheese. So what you're going to do is you take it and you put it into the first ramekin, and then you just roll it around like so right over the next ramekin, and you can see, give it a little tap, a little extra shake to get out any excess, and you can see that all my sides are covered. I have no spots that has no cheese and butter. So then I'm just going to do it over the next one, right, and you just keep doing this until you are done. Okay, give them a little tap, and excess out. And you don't have to have the fancy shredded Parmesan like I'm using. Quite frankly, the grated Parmesan that you get that a lot of people use on their spaghetti or whatever actually works as well, if not better, than this kind does. This kind actually has a tendency to kind of burn onto the ramekins, and they're harder to clean. Okay? Alright, so I've got this all the way turned around, and now this cheese I can either just eat or use for another purpose. Okay? Alright, so my ramekins have been buttered, cheesed, ready to go. So now the bechamel is probably cool enough that I can add my egg yolks. I have 4 egg yolks here, even though we need 5 egg whites. Okay, so we've got my 4 egg yolks, and they're going to go straight into the bechamel. So I'm just going to drop them in. I usually pop first because then they mix much faster. And I'm just going to give it a little stir. You want the mixture to be warm, but not so hot that it's going to cook the yolks, okay? You can see that thinned it down quite a bit, which is part of the reason that we needed it to be extra thick in the beginning. And I just seasoned this with salt and pepper, and you want to check your seasoning before you add the eggs. That way you're not eating raw egg yolk, right? So check your seasoning before you add the eggs, and you might want it just a touch saltier than you think is good, because by the time you add the egg yolks and all the whipped egg whites, which will have no salt in them, it will dilute the salt a little bit. My bechamel is made, egg yolks are in it, my ramekins are ready. You want to make sure all that stuff is done before you start whipping the egg whites. Since cream of tartar is our only stabilizer here, the second that we stop whipping the egg whites, they start to deflate pretty quickly, and we need as much air trapped in them as we can possibly get. Otherwise our soufflés won't rise nicely. So make sure everything else is done before you start whipping your egg whites. I have my egg whites in my bowl. We're going to get them started here in a second. One thing of note, you can either do this in the stand mixer or with a hand mixer. But if you're doing a hand mixer, you don't want to do your egg whites in a plastic bowl. Plastic bowls hold on to fat no matter how hard you clean them. They're very porous. So sometimes it's really hard to get your egg whites to whip because fat is the enemy of egg whites, let me tell you. So you also want to make sure that your bowl is very, very clean. And I even go as far as I have an extra whisk, and the only thing that ever touches this whisk for my stand mixer is egg whites, and anything else I use, it's the other whisk. Just because I get weird about it and I don't want my egg whites to not whip. A lot of people think that you should whip these egg whites to stiff peaks. That is too stiff. We actually want them to whip to medium peaks. Okay? Medium peaks, when we check it, it's going to look like a Dairy Queen ice cream cone with you lift it and it flips back over and makes like a little circle. That is what we're going to be looking for. If we do it to stiff peaks, it's going to be too stiff and it's not going to mix into the egg whites, or it's not going to mix into the bechamel very well. And so then we're going to have lumps, and that creates cracks and bad things happen, right? If we go too soft, there won't be enough air trapped in them to make them rise. So we really want to aim for that medium peaks. Let me show you how we do that. Here I have my egg whites and my cream of tartar. That cream of tartar is going to stabilize these egg whites and hold them together a little bit to give us a little bit of wiggle room on getting it mixed into the bechamel. I have 5 egg whites, even though I only had 4 egg yolks that went into the bechamel. So that extra egg yolk, you can throw it in with some scrambled eggs, you can make some custards out of it, you can do any kind of thing with it that you want, but you only need 4 yolks but 5 whites because we want that extra oomph of lift, right? So I'm going to put this on, and this one, since we're not adding sugar or anything like that, we don't have to wait till it's foamy to add things or do the things. We just need to whip it till it's medium peaks. So I'm going to show you what that looks like when I get there. In general, when we check our egg whites, we want to make sure that we check in the bowl. If you take your thing and flip it over, sometimes it will make it look like it's at a softer stage than it is. So then you keep whipping them and you end up with over-whipped egg whites. So let me show you how we check our whites, and I have my whites done. First thing we do is we give it a little spin to make sure it's all nice and mixed, and you can see it kind of looks like bubble bath, right? So what I did, if you see, I pull it up, and you can see that it kind of bends over, right? Do you see how it bends over? And I have my Dairy Queen ice cream cone. That is medium peak, so basically like this, right? But had I done this, this looks like it's only soft peaks because the gravity and the motion of this would make me believe this was only soft peaks, and I would keep going, and then I would have way over whipped egg whites. Okay? So now we need to get this into this. Okay? If your bowl isn't big enough, you can try and put this into a bigger bowl if your pot is not big enough. Mine should be okay. We're going to see how it works out. Okay? So a lot of people tell you that we have to fold this in three different additions. In my opinion, that actually takes longer and you lose more air. So what I do is what is very counterintuitive. I'm going to take my egg whites, and I'm going to take about, if you notice, it's about a quarter of them or so, right? Quarter to a third. I'm going to drop them in, and I'm going to whisk it. And you're like, but that's going to deflate it. That's okay, because what it actually does is, do you see how it has now lightened up my base? So my base is now light enough that folding the rest in all at once shouldn't be a problem. Okay, so I'm going to set my whisk aside, and now we're only going to do a rubber spatula here. Okay, and you always want to put light on top of heavy, right? So we always add our whites to our bechamel. We never add our bechamel to our whites. Otherwise, it just doesn't fold right. It deflates the egg whites wrong. Okay, so always light on top of heavy, never heavy on top of light. Okay, so I've got my egg whites in here, and I'm now going to fold. So I start in the center, and I up and over, and then I go around. And do you see how I'm turning the pan a little bit with me here to help really incorporate those nicely, and every once in a while through the center and then around the edges, right? And you can use your bowl to help you. Okay? So I'm going to show you what this looks like when it's all nice and folded in. But be very, very gentle because we want that air to stay in those egg whites. All of my egg whites are now folded in. Try and move as fast as you can. The longer you take, the more air you lose, and the more air we lose, the less rise we're going to get. So I like to use this guy because it helps me, but you can get them into the ramekins however you choose, but you see how easy that is to just plop it right in. If you notice on the ramekins, there's like a little ledge inside. And if you're not going to do a collar, you can only fill it to that ledge, okay? So we only want to fill it just to my ledge right here. If you overfill them, they're going to do something that I call mushrooming, where they come up and over the sides, and then they don't have a nice straight rise to them. Okay, so there we go. And last one. Okay, so mine was about 2 scoops per, but depends on what size of scoop you're using. Now I want to make sure to get this off here, okay, because otherwise it'll just burn on my tray. And I have them on a tray more than anything just for ease of use of getting them in and out of the oven. You want to move again as fast as humanly possible on this one so that you lose as little air as possible. So the faster you can go from whipped egg whites to oven, the better. Put these in. Come back in a minute. Once your soufflés are in the oven, you're going to set a timer for 13 minutes. Do not open the door. Do not look at the oven funny. Do not drop heavy things in front of your oven or else your soufflés won't rise right. Okay? That's why everybody is so worried about soufflés, is because the littlest thing can really affect the rise of them. But the biggest problem is that most people really love to open their oven door and check on things. You have a light for a reason. Okay? Every time you open your oven door, you lose heat, right? About 5 degrees per 30 seconds. It's a lot, right? So that's what helps make them fall. And you need the egg whites to fully set before any air hits them, or else that cool air makes them fall, okay? If that happens to you, not the end of the world. What we do is we call it a fallen soufflé, right? And some restaurants or caterers actually serve these this way on purpose, because getting a souffle to stay risen all the way from a kitchen to a table is a delicate thing, and it doesn't work very well. The trick in restaurants is you put cornstarch in it, but in my opinion you can taste the cornstarch, so I don't like to do that. But that's why so many restaurants won't serve a souffle, because they are tricky to get to the customer while they still have the factor. Okay, so 13 minutes. Don't even go near your oven for 13 minutes. 13 minutes, I will show you what to look for. My souffles have been in for 15 minutes. I looked through the window at 13 and I could tell they weren't quite ready. So at 15 is where I'm going to show you that they look like they're about done through my window, but we're going to then open the oven door to confirm. After 13 to 15 minutes, if you open the oven door, it usually doesn't cause them to fall. Let me show you what we're looking for. You can see these are risen very nicely, and I give them a little check. They're a little bit brown, right, on the surface. This is what they should look like. You'll notice that they jiggle a little. That weirds out some people because they think it's underbaked. It's not. A souffle should be light and airy and lovely. If you keep baking them, they get dense and it just doesn't taste as good. So that's why a lot of people think that souffles are underbaked when they're actually baked perfectly. But you can't just grab this and give it to somebody to take with them. So you need to put it on a plate. But if I just put it on a plate like this, it's going to scoot around anywhere I move it. If you put a napkin down first, it will help. Take a very dry towel, very dry, or else you will burn yourself. Okay, and we're going to grab the ramekin and we're going to put it right there. Now it doesn't move anywhere, and I can take this to the table and somebody can eat it straight from the ramekin without any issues. I hope you've enjoyed learning how to make a savory souffle. Now show me those pictures and show me that rise. Have a good week.